My name is Tomas Wyns. I'm a researcher at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. Main topics of my research are, well, renewable energy system transformation, and then also the industrial, in particular energy-intensive industrial transformation towards decarbonization. Also, thanks for the presentation on the results coming out of POLIMP. I think they are very relevant and should also be good for influencing or enriching the debate towards the post-Paris future. I think Paris in particular set quite sharp what the climate challenge is, 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees. If we translate that indirectly to what this means for the European Union, certainly it is an almost complete decarbonization by 2050. That is a transformation basically unseen in modern history. A child born today, she or he, when 30 years old, will have witnessed the complete decarbonization of one of the biggest economies in the world. Problem is not only that this is one transformation, it will be 5 transformations at the same time. There will be a transformation in the building environments, in the broader transport environments, in the industrial manufacturing production environment, in our energy system environment, and in our food and agriculture production environment. 5 gigantic transformations from where we currently are to almost complete decarbonization in less than a generation time. The advantage, of course, is that these 5 simultaneous transitions will be connected, and one transformation will influence transformation in another sector. So looking back at where climate policy comes from and where we need to go, I see 3 areas historically, more or less, but not completely. That we started off with dedicated policy instruments, policy for the industry, for the building sector to reduce X% emissions by a certain date, and very incremental based approach. That happened more or less around, let's say, 2005, 2008, moved together into a mainstreaming movement where we realized, well, climate policy is indeed something that affects every single sector, whether it is for mitigation, adaptation, or resilience. So the mainstreaming elements become more outspoken, and certainly at the EU level, where we have the development policy, includes the climate pillar, where we have our finance policy, or our European budgets. The MFF has a dedicated climate portfolio. But I don't think that is enough. The next step will be about transformational policies within one generation, and these are policies that are broader and also more radical, going indeed to an almost zero emissions within 30 years. I will give an example of what that could mean for 2 sectors. One is the energy system, and the second one is the industry, maybe 3 sectors, and the third one is basically the overall economic system in which we all live. For the energy system, there is basically amazingly good news. If you look at the industrial economics of the renewable energy technologies we currently see, they are performing as industrial economics dictate, where you start off with a high cost, you go into R&D support systems, the costs go down, there is more being built, the cost comes down far. You have this, let's say, inverse exponential curve which is happening and which is leading indeed to those NDCs of many countries around the world that are saying we set a renewable energy goal in India, in China, in Latin America, and in many parts of Africa, not only because it's a green technology, but it is also the technology that is cheap or will become the cheapest technology for energy production. It is going to happen. There is no doubt about that solar, and wind and related technologies will become the cheapest form of electricity production very soon if they are not currently there. We see a similar and supportive movement in the battery technology, and they're related to transport, but also to storage of variable renewable energy technologies a bit later, because the fundamental R&D and then subsidies and the first rollout of these systems occurred later. But the fact that basically Elon Musk 2 weeks ago killed the petrol car by just one announcement is a sign that this technology is rapidly going to maturity and further deployments. So this good news, this is great news, but it might not be that great news for Europe to a certain extent. So countries that haven't built up legacy energy system will be at a critical advantage here, because they can immediately go for these new cost-effective interconnected renewable technologies. For the EU, we are dealing with a legacy system. We have an interconnected, more or less interconnected, established power system, which is relatively diverse across the member states. Some systems are heavily coal-based, others move to renewables, and some are still very nuclear. So the main challenge for the EU will be to tackle the system. How are we going to move from our existing old, inflexible legacy power-producing system towards a variable power-producing system that is interconnected, that is market-based, and that can absorb these new, very cost-effective renewable technologies? So that will be one of the main challenges. And therefore, I'm thinking that what is upcoming at the European level, the proposals for new legislation post-2020, that the market design, the market reform, the electricity market reform proposals will be even more important than the renewable directive revision itself. Because if our post-2020 markets and the barriers in those markets are not addressing the challenges for an incremental and highly increased deployment of renewables, we will not be able to get there. And a recent report from the International Energy Agency basically confirms, if you add renewables onto a system that is inflexible, legacy-based, the cost for doing that will be significantly, I think it is up to 40% higher. So tackling the market will be important. The second part, I've got a few minutes. Second part is industry, and there we are at a different stage again. We will have to reorganize a new industrial revolution with regard to basic energy-intensive manufacturing, and it's one of the research areas I'm looking into, in particular the energy-intensives. And it's basically, I'm confronted with this funny situation that we industrialized in Europe the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, that the research on breakthrough technologies, on radical innovation in these energy-intensive industries is actually quite poor. I have to basically dig up books that were written in the 70s or very old reports to see, hey, what happened here? How did we do that? It's almost as if we lost a little bit of knowledge by, well, being industrialized and not really care about that transformation because it's working very well. We are not going to fix a broken system. But it is indeed a major problem we have. We have to decarbonize also this industrial sector by 2050. And there's a particular problem here because we're dealing with large process installations, very capital intensive, and of course we are dealing with very long investment cycles. So a new blast furnace being built next year, the chances that it's still operational by 2050 is quite high. So that's the challenge. The second challenge is we don't have the technology yet to go to minus 80%. Not at commercial stage. There are, and I will give some examples, promising technologies that are indeed going to make it possible to decarbonize industry. And we will need to look across the whole value and supply chain to do that. So we're not there yet. We need these breakthroughs to happen. And the third element, of course, is, and has been mentioned a few times here before, is the competitiveness concern. If we move fast too fast in Europe, too high carbon price. We will see carbon leakage, investment leakage, and basically the worst parts of economics collapse ever seen, as it has been said by some. So that's another concern. What I've learned from, however, from these old papers, and some of them, of course, date from the 80s and the 90s, on industrial transformation, is that industrial transformation happens or accelerates if there is an important productivity or cost benefit for the industry involved. And if even an environmental measure implemented in industry in the past, if it came with a productivity increase, the board, the shareholders would have said, yes, okay, we go for that. So the holy grail for industrial transformation is to tackle both those things. We need to decarbonize processes, products, and at the same time make these industries more productive and more competitive. And all evidence of the technologies that are currently being explored in the cement sector, in the chemical sector, in the aluminum sector, in the steel sector, tackle those two things. There is a famous Dutch pilot plant in IJmuiden, a new blast furnace being designed. It's called Hysarna. It started off with European funding. It's cross-collaboration between sectors and suppliers. It's a blast furnace that can reduce CO2 emissions by 20% because it doesn't need a coking and a sintering plant before. It can be linked to carbon capture and storage. But the interesting bit of this new blast furnace is that it has an increased productivity, that it is smaller, and that it can apply it in modular forms, which is very interesting for a steel sector, which is highly circular, so it can adapt much quicker. Another example, and that's a bit out of the box thinking, our technologists in the UK have now set up a small company, Azotic Technologies, who discovered that there are naturally occurring bacteria who are very efficient at extracting nitrogen from the air. And that's essentially the holy grail for fertilizer. That's why we dump a humongous amount of ammonium-based fertilizer on the ground to make some of it being absorbed by plants. But they found these bacteria. They're now testing these out on famous crops like rapeseed and corn. And they realized that we can have the same yield with 50% less ammonium, and with 50% less fertilizer and hence ammonium. So this is another radical breakthrough really down the value chain of this industrial production. So there are many other technologies. Most of my time is analyzing these technologies and see which are going to be fruitful. But to make this transformation happen, we will need to tackle competitiveness and decarbonization at the same time. However, and that's my third point, the whole macroeconomics of the European Union, if our growth, if our fundamental investment climate, if our fundamental macroeconomic climate is not okay, they will not happen. Nothing of what I said before will ever materialize. And to be honest, our macroeconomic, our investment climate is not okay at the moment. We went too far in a more or less laissez-faire economy. High growth, everything went well, we had the investments, and then we had the economic crisis, and we don't seem to be able to get out of that. It will all come down to a significant amount of public and private investments that have to occur over the next 30 years. Coming back to the first point again, these transformations in these 5 sectors, and the Commission did a calculation of what that means financially speaking, will require investments of around, and it is investments, they are not costs, investments in our own economy, in these products, in these processes, in these energy sectors of around 250 billion euros a year. That's basically the Juncker investment plan every single year from now until 2050. That's what we need. However, on the other hand, we have our macroeconomic, our Maastricht, or our budget orthodoxy policies that basically say, no, that's not going to happen. If you as a government invest too much, if your deficit is above a certain limit, you get punished. And so there is this huge contradiction. And I think that the Juncker investment plan and also other areas clearly show that it cannot work like this anymore, that we will need a structural, transformational, productivity, decarbonization aimed investment plan for the next 30 years, and that the ballpark figure, and it's not going to be all government money, of course, is indeed these hundreds of billions a year. And in the end, what can we do? There are a few things, few small examples. If a government invests in this power system transformation or assists industry in investing in these breakthrough technologies, it should be given leniency when the European semester happens, because it is doing so to help achieve an EU-wide goal. So this system transformation, that's the last thing I'm going to say, will be probably the best thing we will ever see happen in Europe, if it ever happens. The baby born today will grow up in a growing, competitive and cleaner economy. And that's the thing we should look at.